5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Like this.
Hey, I'm Mike Gilliam in the CUNY TV studios in the shadows of the Empire State Building in New York City. Welcome to Let It Rip. So far, 50 people have been charged in the college bribery and cheating scandal. And recently, a number of them appeared in a Boston courtroom. The parents are accused of using their wealth to make sure that their kids got into some of the most selective universities in the entire country. Now, we're talking schools like Yale, Stanford, the University of Southern California, and Georgetown. Among those facing charges, actress Lori Loughlin, who was in the 80s and 90s sitcom Full House, and also a number of Hallmark movies. And her husband, fashion designer Massimo Giannulli. They're accused of paying $500,000 to get their daughters into USC as members of the crew team, even though they didn't row. And Felicity Huffman, who starred in Desperate Housewives, is accused of paying a proctor $15,000 to correct her daughter's ACT test. Those are just a couple of the examples. Others are accused of paying huge sums of money to buy their kids a leg up on the competition. Now they're being accused of bribery and fraud, crimes that could send them to prison for 20 years if they're convicted. It's being called one of the biggest college admissions schemes ever prosecuted in the U.S. How big? A number of parents are accused of paying the ringleader, Rick Singer, an admissions counselor, $25 million between 2011 and 2018. He says he helped 750 families. But here's the irony. This all comes at a time when affirmative action, which was supposed to level the playing field, has been under attack, with many saying we don't need it anymore. They say the field is obviously level because we've had a black president. So, where are we now when it comes to higher education and sorting this all out? We're going to try to dig a little bit deeper into this whole issue. Here to help us with the topic is New York City Council member Inez Barron, who serves as the chair of the Higher Education Committee. She was a teacher and principal for more than 36 years. Now, we're talking about this college cheating scandal, which caught a lot of people by surprise, others not so much. What did you think when you first heard about this scandal?
I thought, oh, okay, here's an expose. I had always thought, without having any kind of documentation, that it was going on, but did not know the breadth and the depth to which people would go to extend themselves to make sure that their child got into a school of their choosing, which they thought was an Ivy League school. It's sort of sad because it says the parent really doesn't have the confidence in their child's ability to qualify to go into that. We know there's always been the kind of legacy tradition where, oh, your grandparents went, your parents went, so you get some preference for that. But the fact that people extended themselves to the point of illegalities is depressing to know that that happens, but the reality is that it does happen. More than just giving a $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 gift so that your child would have that preference.
Oh,
but
no, this
paying
was,
people.
This was $500,000 for two at USC.
Exactly. Paying so that your child would get in, paying so that someone would correct your child's incorrect answers so that they would have a higher score, all that photoshopping. And it's also depressing to know that the universities didn't do more analysis, didn't ask for further verification, didn't require the sending high schools to verify that they had, in fact, been on the teams that they had said they had been on and what their performance record had been. But it's an expose, and it shows that this system continues to operate on what has been embedded in all of its institutions and organizations, that, first of all, blacks are not considered equals and have been denied their basic rights from the beginning. And secondly, that if you're wealthy and you've got money, you can get what you want.
Do you think that those parents were feeling some pressure from other students who might have been doing very well with their academics? I'm speaking basically of Asian students who have been doing very well with testing and that sort of thing, and that there was a downward pressure on them and they felt a bit squeezed for these spots?
I think that it reflects their character and their lack of integrity or their level of integrity. I think that whatever that pressure was, they had the wherewithal to provide the kind of financial support and tutoring and live-in tutors or whatever it was that they needed if they really wanted to make sure that their child would be able to score well on the test. But beyond all of that, it speaks to the requirement that there be more measures than just one test, one SAT that determines whether or not a child is going to be able to come into their school. They have grades that they could be evaluated, recommendations from teachers and professionals. They have their whole opportunity to do a portfolio and to demonstrate what they've done consistently over the years that would make them a good student at any of the institutions that they wanted to apply for. The emphasis that has been put on standardized testing has, I think, in many areas intensified people's measures, the length to which they will go, to be able to get into a particular school. The emphasis is saying that this particular test will decide what your future is going to be. It also talks about the fact that here in New York City, that one test that's taken for the specialized high schools is beyond any other measure to evaluate a student's ability to perform in high-performing schools. And as we know, there are measures, there's a bill that my husband, Assemblymember Charles Barron, has introduced that says, no, we need to look at multiple criteria to decide if, in fact, students are capable to be able to be performing well in the schools in which they're going to. And the American Psychological Society has said that it is not good for any one standardized test to be used to determine whether or not a student is admitted to a specialized high school. So we know that historically, tests have not been culturally sensitive. They've been biased. They've been racist. And our children have been the ones who have been most affected by those kinds of biases in the testing. And for the specialized high schools, that test has not been validated.
The parents involved in this whole college cheating scandal and their children, if they're found guilty, what should happen to them?
For me, I think the consequences should be that the parents pay the consequence of returning or paying a debt and having jail time. It was a crime. And I think that the crimes that were committed are deserving of the sentences that meet those crimes. For the students, they haven't demonstrated that they, in fact, qualified to be students at those schools, and I would believe that the admissions would look at whether or not they should remain in those schools. They took a spot that someone else had worked hard to get and was denied that spot because of the illegality of their actions in the admission process.
Let's talk a little bit, though, about leveling the playing field for students. The very wealthy are able to be tutored. They're able to take various classes to prepare for the college entrance exams. But that might not be so available to people who don't have those means. What can be done to help them to be prepared to take the test and deal with the current system?
There's lots that we can do in our school system, and much of that talks about having support groups, having one-on-one mentoring, having the ability for students to benefit from after-school programs that are supposedly in all of our middle schools, but they vary in the level of their efficiency and effectiveness. But we know also that many of these schools are themselves moving away from just having the SAT be the measure and the criterion in which students are based and evaluated to come into their schools.
You have sponsored some legislation about free tuition. Tell me about it.
Well, it's a resolution that says that we need to have the next 2 years after post-secondary graduation should be tuition free. So it's a resolution that's calling on that, and there also was resolution that a law that we had a task force to examine how, in fact, we can improve the access for students to get into CUNY, how we can support them.
You talked about free tuition at CUNY, and I assume the SUNY schools as well. But at the same time, you've got people out in California paying $500,000 to get 2 kids into USC. So even with free tuition, does the playing field ever really get leveled there?
I think if all of the schools, particularly now that we're talking about this age of technology and understanding that we've got to look at how we can make sure that more Black and brown students are getting in. So now in those institutions that continue to have high tuitions, they've got to do more. They've got to continue to address the issue of the inequity over the years. They've got to address the issue of those colleges that built their wealth on selling other slaves that they owned to be able to continue what their institutions were. And they've got to make sure that Black and brown, particularly Black and brown students, are able to get admission and support while they are there. So you may know that there were only 7 Black students who were offered admission to Stuyvesant. But some of them are considering not going because they don't want to be such a minuscule minority in terms of the number of students and not have support, not have camaraderie, not have appreciation for their cultural expressions. So some of them are saying they don't want to be that one in their class, that one in their entire composition of their cohort that they're in. So some of them are saying, even though it's been offered, they may not go.
I think when a lot of people look at the cost of going to school at CUNY and in New York City, the one thing they forget is that this is not a college town. This is New York City.
Correct.
Housing is expensive. Transportation is
Yes.
expensive. It's all expensive.
Right. And we're looking to see how we can make sure that CUNY students will be able to get benefits from the half fare that we talked about, the half fare fare fares. So we are hoping to make sure that all of CUNY students will be able to at least get that benefit. And there are some programs that CUNY has that provides Metro cards for students. There's an ASAP program, and that does provide all of the participants with a Metro card, as well as it gives them the cost of their books. So CUNY has some programs. We're looking to expand them and make sure that we can make it more relevant and more widespread. Students in ASAP do not pay tuition at all. So that's a good program. We're trying to expand it and make it even better.
Councilmember Inez Barron, thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I hope to come back and visit with you again.
We'll definitely have you back.
Thank you.
We'll be back with more of Let It Rip in a minute.
You're watching CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Welcome back to Let It Rip. I'm Mike Gilliam. I'm joined now by Joan P. Gibbs, the former general counsel of the Center of Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College, and Cairo Shishuru, a human rights attorney and a graduate student at the City College of New York, who was born in Kenya. Welcome to Let It Rip.
Thank you for having us.
Let's start right off the top. I need to get your reaction to this scandal. Joan, what do you think about this Varsity Blues scandal?
Well, what surprised me more than anything else was the fact that they were indicted, because things like this have been going on for decades, if not centuries. In fact, everybody knows that the parents who are wealthy can get their children into a university by making a donation, for example, to the school.
They build a wing or something, right?
So what was really just shocking to me was that these parents seemed to be very desperate in a sense, because there had to be another way to get their kids into these schools without them having to engage in bribery and fraud and all these other things. So that's what, but I wasn't shocked by it because this goes on all the time.
Kiru, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it calls into question this idea of meritocracy, right? This idea that if you study hard and you do what you're supposed to do, you can go ahead and get into college. However, if we're looking at white folks who are able to pay their way into college, then it begs the question: is it that you can buy your way into college, or do you work your way into college? So I think it's rather depressing that black folks have been working hard and being told that you have to work hard, you have to lift yourself by your bootstraps, only to show up and then find out that you could actually buy your way into college if you're wealthy. We know that the racial wealth gap is something that has been a thorny side in America for quite a long time. So we know the option of buying your way into college for a lot of black folks, not that it would make it right, but just isn't an option that they can explore.
When I look at this, I see two things there, like two sets of advantages. First off, you have the wealth to be able to afford private tutoring, private schools, test-taking preparation courses, and all of that that are available to the very wealthy or people of means. And then at the same time, you have bribery going on. You have people taking tests for students and recruiting coaches to view them as athletes. There's a lot there.
Right. Yeah, they went to a greater degree than most, I would just say, to put it that way. This whole idea of a meritocracy has never been real, you see. Even the earliest days of schooling, from kindergarten on, wealthy students are at an advantage because they have access to all those things you named, tutoring and all those things. So these parents, I guess, I don't know what it says about their students, but about their children, that they had to go to these great lengths to get them into school.
Makes me wonder how you get them through school.
Right. Makes me wonder, how did they get as far as they did?
And they were so entwined into this whole thing. If I remember correctly, one of Lori Loughlin's daughters was on the head trustee for USC's yacht on spring break when the story broke.
Right. So they had the connection.
So how do you fix this?
Well, I mean, I think you have to reform the entire system. If we're going to get to a point where students can actually get in based on merit, we have to make sure that the testing is also not culturally biased, especially towards Black and Latinos. We also have to reform the entire student loan programs, because we know that for a lot of Black folks, for a lot of Latinos, they have to pay their way through college using loans. And that means that when they do graduate, they have significant debt burdens. They may not be going into careers that actually pay significant amount of money to allow them to actually be able to pay back those loans. And so that means they have to sort of live on the economic margins while they service the loan debt. So I think that's part of the equation also. We also have to invest in our pre-K and from pre-K to high school, to make sure that kids are actually prepared, that when they do get to college, that they can compete on the same level as some of their white peers who have significant advantages because they have significant resources to study for the ACT, to study for the SATs, which makes them better prepared to take those tests. So I think you'll have to look at it from a holistic standpoint as opposed to choosing just one dimension of the problem.
One of the things you kind of touched on there is the fact that it is so expensive now to go to many of these universities, and the costs have just skyrocketed over, say, the last 10, 15 years. Yeah. And one of the reasons for that is that our state governments and our government has not been taking care of the colleges and universities. They haven't been doing their part. And so because of that, the universities are out after a different type of student. They're after that wealthy student, correct?
Well, one of the things states could do, in cities as well, is to make admissions to those open admissions, as it was in the past, and make those institutions free, so that we would provide at least education for a large number of people. And that's with respect to the private institutions. That's another matter. I mean, I think their whole admission process is riddled with errors to the extent that there's too much reliance on testing, how you didn't test, and phony extracurricular activities where wealthy kids, they put on I went. What did you do? And all these
they Photoshop their kids' heads on athletes' bodies.
All of that they need to have an admission process that's transparent.
Don't need affirmative action anymore, right?
Of course, we need affirmative action.
Yeah.
We definitely need affirmative action.
Because we see here with this that the playing field never was level.
Right.
It's not level.
Right. Yeah, and that's why, it's rather incredulous that people would think that you don't need affirmative action, because affirmative action historically has been used to address previous discrimination. So if you look at the 1964 Civil Rights Act, it actually benefited a lot of white women because they had sort of been marginalized from whether it's education, employment, and any other profession that they wanted to go into. And so when you get to now rich white kids, right, they're able to get access to these institutions, and the presumption is that they belong there. Now, when you get to black folks or when you get to Latinos, then the presumption is that they needed affirmative action to get in, which again is a sense of irony here, because even when you look at one of the Instagram posts of one of the parents, I think it was Laughlin's daughter, she indicated she wasn't really interested in going to college, even though she really wanted to experience the partying and the sports and all that, which is fine because it's part of the college experience. But we know that once she got into USC, no one assumed she didn't belong there.
Right.
As opposed to, a black or Latino kid who's worked really hard and done what they're supposed to do to get in. But even when they do get in, there's always a question lingering as to why, or how they got in.
Why are you here?
Right, exactly. So it's really, really challenging for a lot of black folks. But I think we should still go back to a point where affirmative action is taken into consideration, or a person's race or color is taken into consideration when they're being considered for admissions in any school.
Okay. Right. Bottom line, what are there a couple of things that they can do right now that would help to fix this problem? Joan?
Well, I think we have to consider education as a human right, and that has to be a right beginning from the earliest age until you decide to end exercise of that right. I mean, there are countries in the world, I can name some, where education is free. Mm-hmm. In Cuba, for example. Right. And also, Germany has a lot of its education is free. So the United States has to be transformed in larger ways than most people consider. These what we are saying now is just temporary reforms. Right. One of which should, of course, include loan forgiveness. Some way of contributing to society, and in return, you get your loan forgiven. But basically, we have to propagate the notion that education is a human right and get people to work toward that end.
So you're talking not just about making sure that state budgets are not balanced using educational institutions, but you're also talking about reforming student loans. How much interest are we really going to charge on those loans? Can we make them interest-free loans, or actually make them low-cost loans so that people are able to actually borrow the money and pay it back in a decent amount of time?
Provided that these parents are found guilty in court, what should happen to them, and what should happen to students who got into school this way?
That's a great question. Well, I don't think there's going to be any jail time, but I think that there should be some sort of process where they're able to pay a fine that could be either contributed towards a school that speaks to, or rather a program that finances low-income students who are trying to get into the school, so that money at least goes to some benefit. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the young students, or rather the children, if they were not holding up the end of the bargain in terms of performing well in school, then they could either transfer to another school or actually start the process again. But that depends where they are academically. If they've been doing well, then I think they should just be allowed to continue.
But you don't even know if they're doing the work.
We don't know that, right? We don't know that. Again, they paid their way in, so maybe the incentive to actually perform and do the work is not there.
Well, Joan? I don't know whether they get time or not. I think they should. I really do. I think they should. And I also think, I'm a bit harsher than my brother here, is that their children should be kicked out of school. Because, for far too long, wealthy people have, just exercised privilege and taken advantage of a situation that the other of us don't have an opportunity to consider. So I don't generally like to see anybody go to jail because I'm against incarceration. Think, of that crew that there should, prison should be abolished one day. But as long as they exist, and as long as that black people are going to jail in this country for crimes that nobody else, that white people never go to jail for, then if they are convicted, I think they should go to jail.
Kibu Yashiro, Joan Gibbs, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Now for some final thoughts. The college cheating scandal is enough to make your blood boil, especially at a time when many have claimed that the playing field in our country is now level and that everyone has an equal chance to get a quality education and be successful. Sure, we've made advancements and there are opportunities, but the Varsity Blues scandal shows, and remember, people are pleading guilty to charges in this. It shows that money buys privilege, and it's been possible for families of means to tilt the playing field in favor of their children. The message was, work hard, study hard, and you can have an equal shot at going to the best schools. The message was that no one could take away the effort you put in, that life is fair for those who work hard. But this sends the wrong message. The scandal sends the opposite message, that while you're working hard to better yourself, someone else is getting a leg up on you, not because that they're smarter or that they're working harder, but because their wealthy parents have paid someone to take the test for them, or to change the answers on their test, or to make it look like they're an athlete when they are not. There's a lot to digest there, and I haven't even mentioned those without means coming out of school with heavy student loan debt. It's pretty clear that a lot needs to be done to correct the problems in the system, from making sure that students compete fairly for the spots at the top universities, to supporting our schools with more funding so that tuition isn't so expensive, to finding ways to ease the financial burden after graduation, to supporting students so they can do well at the college level. There's a lot that can be done to improve education, but it's going to take hard work on the part of all, not just prospective students, but schools, administrators, and lawmakers as well. We'll see you next time on Let It Rip.